to the astrology interview with Alejo Lopez. Well, I'm so particularly thrilled to invite Alejo here because he was my tutor at the Faculty of Astrological Studies as I was going through my 4-year training. And you're still a tutor, aren't you, there?
Yes,
You've
I'm
been there
still a
for
tutor.
quite a while, haven't you?
Sorry?
Been there quite a while.
Now I think maybe 5 or 6 years. Yes.
Yes. And you have your own psychology and astrological practice.
Yes.
From home. And I think this is right. You live in Greece, but you come from Brazil.
I come from Argentina.
Argentina.
Yes. It's okay. I live in Greece. Yes. Close enough. Argentina. Yes.
Yeah. And you're currently training to be a Jungian therapist.
Yes, to be certified by the Zurich Institute. Yes.
Okie doke. So you have just written a really fascinating dissertation to gain your MA in astronomy and astrology at Lampeter University. And I think it's true to say you won a prize for it, didn't you?
Yes, I won the prize. Yes. It was chosen like the best dissertation of the year or something like that. Yeah.
Well, it's a fascinating one because I've read it several times actually right before this interview. But it's really about the sun and moon archetypes and questioning whether astrology is gender-based. But before we get into that and explore that, I want to know is how did astrology call you to do the work that you do?
Oh, that's the long story and the short story. I would say I would make like a medium-sized story. So I would say, first of all, when I was a kid, when I was 6 or 7 years old, I used to play that I was like this wizard from the Islamic world. I used to dress like an Arab. And I used to play that I was engaging with the planets. I was calling the planets. I didn't know any astrology.
Wow.
Then when I grew up, I heard about Kabbalah from the Judaistic tradition. I don't know how you say it. And I was very interested, but my family was very like rational, logical approach. I had friends who were Jews and they were like, no, you might get crazy if you learn this. So it kind of was in the back. And then when I was 20, I got my first job. And the first thing I did was wanted to learn like mystical stuff. And I asked a friend who knew a lot about this stuff, and she sent me to a Kabbalah course. And in that course, I discovered astrology because I was an astrologer. And I loved the way she was talking. So I asked her, I want to learn this that you're saying. Because the thing is, when I was 20, I got my first job. So I had money to invest in whatever I wanted. And so she told me, you need to go to this school in Buenos Aires. And so I went to the school and I didn't even know what a chart was. I just went there, yeah. And then it started. And to be honest, when I first started studying astrology, first of all, I didn't know what it was about. Like, I thought it was more about like magic, like doing magic. And at first I was quite disappointed that we were studying so much psychology. I was like, but I want to learn how to do magic, you know? I was old already, I was 20. But anyway, and then I got more and more into it. And at first I thought it was going to be just something that you study because you like it. I never thought it was going to be my profession. You know, I think something built up as I was studying it.
It's a funny feeling because I do think we get called to it. There's a sense.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
It's almost like when astrology gets you in its grasp, you're done for. There's nothing else that you can do apart from astrology, or in whatever capacity you want to do it in.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, I agree.
So tell me how you got involved or interested in the whole concept of the moon and the sun archetypes, and looking at what you looked at in your dissertation.
Okay, so actually, first I was more interested in the concept of gender than in the solar and lunar archetype. I was interested.
What drew you into looking at gender?
I think maybe part of my personal story. You know, I was told what it is to be a man and what it is to be a woman. I'm definitely not a woman, but I don't know if I'm a man, at least not by what I was told a man is. So I was always like struggling with this. I was struggling also with the astrological text when they have some descriptions of what happens more in terms, I see it more in terms of Venus and Mars, probably. Like they say, the men project their Venus into their women. And then I remember reading some text about homosexuality and then how this works. And it sounded really not describing who I am as a homosexual man. So I started questioning these ideas. And then something opened up when I learned about the dignities of the planets. So I learned that the moon in Capricorn is a bad moon, or Venus in Pisces is a good Venus. And I thought these ideas are expressing gender ideas. So Venus in Pisces, the romantic woman who puts herself at service to these fantasies is a good Venus. Yes. And then the moon in Capricorn, the mother that is autonomous, that is self-reliant, that's not a good mother. Mothers should rely on the man, and I started kind of questioning this. So when I started the MA, I knew I was not when I was started, but as I was going through the MA, this kind of noise in my head about the idea of gender was kind of piling up in my head. I saw this movie. It's a very stupid thing. I saw this movie, Billie Jean King, the movie about the match of the century. And there's a scene in which she gets very upset. And one of her friends said, "What happened?" And the other friend said, she just met destiny, because she realizes that it's her destiny to fight this match. And when I saw this movie, I was like, okay, this is what I have to talk about. I mean, I'm called to talk about this because I've been thinking about this for so long. This is what I'm called to do.
Literally, you felt it was your destiny to do this.
Yes. And my dissertation at the beginning, it says, it's dedicated to my diamond who brought me here, because I really feel that something brought me here. Yes.
It's interesting, isn't it? Before we get into this, I just want to talk to you about that, because, I mean, we don't know how astrology works, do we?
No, not yet. Yeah.
Not yet. But it's this sense of being called. And I'm sure you have the same experience, but when clients often come at a moment where their destiny is calling them, but they don't quite understand what that means, because they've never been taught to listen to their inner self or their destiny or whatever it is. Do you have that experience as well?
Yes, of course. Yes. And I think sometimes sometimes they're actually very much listening to their inner world, but they're afraid. So they come to have like a higher approval that, yes, they're in the right path.
Yes. It is a sort of validation, isn't it? Lots of people say, I feel validated.
Yes, yes.
So let's return to your calling to write this dissertation. So how did you start looking at it? What sort of set you off?
So I wanted to talk about this thing about the gender, and my tutors, what they told me was, okay, this is too big. You have to choose something to pin it down into something more concrete. And this has been my problem, if you want, through the whole MA. That was always like too much. And they were like, it's just an essay of 1,000 words. Come on, don't go all the way. So for the dissertation, they say, yes, it's a dissertation, but it's just an MA dissertation. It's not a PhD. So you have to pin it down to something smaller. So I had to choose something. And I was reading, I don't remember exactly what I was reading, but in psychoanalysis, I see also a lot of gender ideas that sometimes I think are wrong. Not wrong, but perhaps inaccurate. Or that they don't describe the reality I perceive, at least. And
what do you
so
mean
I was
by
reading
that?
at these things.
Hello? Can you just explain what you mean by that they don't perceive the reality that you understand?
Well, that it's very binary, and this idea that there is a psychology, a certain psychological development if you're a man or a woman. And for Freud, it was like for women to have envy of the male organ was what was going to give them a good psychology. It was like
It's a little
I'm
bit outmoded these days, isn't it?
yes, and I'm simplifying it a lot. I mean, I think there is a context in which I understand why he said this. Uh, but I always felt like also the Oedipus complex. The Oedipus complex, I always felt like it's a little bit. It doesn't, to me, it doesn't fit reality. This idea that every man wants to psychologically kill their father and marry their mother. I think it works sometimes, but then this idea that when it's not solved properly, then that's why we have homosexuality. These kind of things. Well, like I think the whole gender has kind of complicated things, and
it was of the time being very that the polarity of the moon and the sun, or the male and the female, had its time, because it
yeah,
was a structured society that we lived in, and we all lived within that rule, that sense of inverted commas morality that was acceptable in those days. But
yes, and I
it's
would say it's not.
well,
I mean, gender is a concept, and I wouldn't say that it's a bad concept. I think it can be useful in certain contexts, but I think we have, well, one of the authors I quote, Sandra Bem, she says that the gender has been spread to in every experience of humanity, and I think that's when there's because we cannot eliminate the gender, the category of gender, and one of the reasons I think we cannot eliminate the category of gender is because nowadays we are becoming more and more aware how much women have suffered. And also there is the whole transsexual movement of people asking to be accepted as women or as men. So we cannot suddenly eliminate this concept. I said, no, this concept doesn't mean anything, because for so many people it means so much, and it describes the reality of so many people. So we cannot just take it away. So my idea is that it's a model. Gender is like a concept that help us to express certain aspect of reality, but that sometimes we apply it to certain extents that maybe it's not very clear what it means. And with the sun and the moon, that now I'm thinking as I'm speaking, what triggered me, let's say, was the idea that the moon is the mother and the sun is the father. And this may be because I have a friend who's a single gay man, and he had a baby through the surrogacy, which I know is super controversial, and I'm not super clear where I stand, if I approve or not. But he did the surrogacy. He had to go to the USA to get his daughter and bring her to Spain, and he doesn't speak English, so he asked me to go with him. So I went with him. I was there with 3 months, taking care of this baby, which was a whole new experience for me. And it really, like, this idea of the moon is the mother and the sun is the father, it was really like, I had always thought it was a little bit strange, but this time I was having the experience myself, because this baby had 2 men taking care of her, and now only 1 man, because my friend lives in Spain. He's not my partner. And so I kept thinking, how is this expressing the multiplicity of realities in which children grow? And that's why I decided to choose the moon and the sun. Yeah.
I just want to ask you, when you were looking after the baby, did you feel a mothering instinct? Did you feel that sense of connection? Because you carry the archetype of the moon within you. Of course you do, as much as I carry the archetype of the sun. I'm a woman. You're in a male body, I'm in a female body. And I'm just curious about how that felt for you, having been brought up with this understanding that men do this and women do that. What was it like for you to be in
it was a life-changing experience. Yes. So yes, of course I had this kind of nourishing, protective quality that was coming out. I was surprised once. I remember when we went back to Barcelona, once I went out during the night, not during the evening, I would say. I was coming up back late, maybe 1 or 2 a.m. And I remember being on the subway and someone was coughing. And I remember thinking, I cannot get sick because I'm going back to the house with the babies. And I have never had this experience before, maybe a little bit with my parents, through COVID and everything. But my parents live in Buenos Aires, I live here. So I had never had this experience of, I have to be careful, I cannot get sick, which is something I heard parents say a lot.
Yes, of course.
And suddenly I had this experience. So it did change. Also, it connected me with my own sense of tenderness, vulnerability. It also, for me, it was an experience that also it brought me memories of not when I was a baby, of course, because I don't have memories, but memories like fake memories, of the stories they tell you about when you were a baby. So it was, the moon archetype was pretty much activated, yes.
I just wondered if you had the same experience. I can remember giving birth to my son and taking him home and suddenly having this utter realization that I was responsible for somebody's life. I don't know if my husband felt the same. I didn't actually ask him, but I know I felt that as a mother. And I wondered if that was something that came to you as well.
Yeah, for sure. And it was very interesting because my friend, of course, he was the father, so he was more stressed probably. So the baby would relax some days, not every day, but some days she would relax much more when I held her. And sometimes he was very frustrated. And I was telling him, but it's because, of course, when she cries, you get so much more triggered than I am, so much more relaxed. So it's easier for me to calm her. But I had this feeling like I need to be here. Ideally, I was going to go there just for 2 weeks to help him with the paperwork, and then I was going to come back until he could bring the baby. But then I had to stay because I was like, I cannot leave this poor baby with this man alone. He's a great father. I don't want to sound. He's a great father, but it was interesting. And also something I would like to state. Of course, I have no idea what it's like to give birth, so I don't want to again override that experience. One of the astrologers I interviewed, this is what he said. He said, yes, the moon is the mother because we were all being given birth. So that experience is in the chart. So you cannot take it out. Even if you are raised by 2 men, the moon is the woman who gave birth to you. And it's interesting also because when you have a surrogate baby, there's the woman who donated the egg, and there's the woman who went through the pregnancy. And we had to go through, I say we, my friend had to go through the trial in which the woman who did the pregnancy has to give up her rights as a mother. Now, what's interesting is that for fathers, it's the genetic code that defines who is a father. Yeah. But for motherhood, the woman who donated the egg did not have to do anything to give up her rights as a mother. It was the woman who gave birth who had to give up her rights. So it's so interesting. I think this experience of giving birth is what defines what is a mother.
That's such an interesting thing to think about, isn't it? I mean, I kind of known that intellectually, but it's lovely to be able to talk about that having given birth. And I've had friends who have been adopted and who have adopted, and that's been. I'm just thinking about particularly one friend who's had a very successful. She was brought up very successfully by her adoptive family, and then she met her birth mother, and she had no feeling for her birth mother at all. And yet, other people who have that experience find their birth mother and they feel like they found something that's missing.
Yeah.
Or they find their father and they feel like there's a completion going on. And I find that a really interesting concept about, again, the mother, that, what is mother? What is mother? And as you say, the archetype is quite limited in that.
Yeah, I think so. Yes. And, I asked different astrologers. So some astrologers would say, um, like, for instance, this astrologer who was saying, yeah, the mother is the person who gave birth. He worked with, actually, he also worked with people who have been adopted. And he said, there's a repetition in the kind of foster mothers they get until they get somebody who adopts them. Uh, and there's a repetition of pattern, which is always that moon in the chart.
Mm.
I don't know, this is what he said that he has observed.
Yes.
I like the idea of, I also asked if to astrologers if they thought the archetypes had gender, and some of them said no, some of them said yes, many of them said no, but then when they had to describe, they couldn't avoid bringing images of feminine goddesses when they were talking about feminine archetypes. So I like the idea, I think it's Jan Knox, she's a Jungian psychologist, and she says that it's time to change, and instead of talking about the mother archetype, to talk about the nurturing archetype.
That's an interesting one.
Kind of trying to take that out.
I'm just wondering, and do you? I don't know if you're willing to share this, but what sign your moon is in?
My moon is in Cancer.
I
It's
mean,
super
that's
mother
the end.
archetype. Yes.
I mean, do you know what? As you were talking, I thought, I bet his moon's in Cancer.
My moon is in
Mine's
Cancer.
in Virgo, so it's very much about service more than. Yes, it's got that. I'm more less emotionally involved than a moon in Cancer. So actually, just separating out the moon for itself as mother, surely we're missing a big story by not saying moon in a particular sign, because
Mm.
that would make sense, wouldn't it?
Yes, I agree with you a lot. Yes. So because sometimes I think we confuse, yeah, I mean, sometimes I think we confuse the meaning of archetype. The way I understand archetype is I think we confuse archetypes with myths. And myths are not archetypes. Myths are manifestations of the archetype. So there are different manifestations of the archetype. Uh, the archetype is more obscured, I think. It's harder to reach.
Yes, it's an interesting one, isn't it? But the archetype of moon in Cancer is you going off to help your friend look after
Exactly.
the
Yes.
baby.
Yes. And this thing that the nurses said that, I immediately learned how to wrap the baby. I immediately learned how to do so many things.
Okay, oddball question.
Yeah.
Do you think because you've come through as a very sensitive man that is very attuned to nurturing, and you've got moon in Cancer, do you feel like that you could have been a mother, let's say in a past life, or you're carrying that disposition
Mhm.
through in your psyche, and this lifetime you're playing it out in a man's body, let's put it that way?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe yes. I don't know. Yes.
It's an
It's
interesting one, isn't it? I think if it was linked with your nodes, that would be more of a.
because there are so many different things in a chart. So yes, if we take this part of the chart, we might say that. But then if we take other parts of my chart in many other ways is very detached. So because when we look at the chart, yes, there are so many different layers and complexities. So
Yeah.
now we're talking a lot about the moon. So we're talking about this core of my chart, which is very sensitive and very caring. But also there's a huge other aspects in my chart that are very kind of detached and free and
Yes.
um,
But I suppose if you're looking at this concept of the of the moon in a particular sign, then we have to look now at the sun. I guess it relates to that in the same way. Like you can't just say, oh, the sun is masculine, but you can say, well, the sun is, you know, in, let's say, in Cancer is very nurturing, but you don't have
Mhm.
sun in Cancer. What is your sun in? Are you okay to say that?
Taurus.
Sorry,
In
Taurus.
Taurus.
Oh, well,
It's quite
it's
nurturing, I think. Yes.
it's a lot nurturing. Yeah.
Yes.
And it's interesting because my sun is in Aquarius, so I have quite a detached moon and quite a detached sun.
Ah, okay, it's interesting. Yes, but I guess in some people it's not so much in accordance, and that's why they have this feeling of tension, right? Because they feel like they have certain needs, but they want to be something else.
Yes. I find the whole concept of motherhood a fascinating thing because modern motherhood is so different from how it used to be. And fatherhood. I mean, in my, you know, when I was born, my father wasn't present at my birth because he just didn't do that in those days. But now try looking at a dad out of the birth, you know, the birthing room, and you've got a fight on your hand for those that want to be there, by the way. Not everybody does, but if there is an expectation for dad to be there.
Yeah,
But
and I
the
think
whole thing is
in,
different.
also for fatherhood, like I think in the past it was expecting the father to be absent. We expected the fathers to be working all the time to bring money, and that's the way they express their love for their children. Now, if they do that, we say they're absent fathers, they're not expressing love. But in the past, this was the way parents expressed love. If a father wanted to stay home to be with the children, he would have been judged as not being responsible, not being a man, right? In the same
Yes,
way that women were judged, and probably harder, women were charged of not being mothers when they wanted to work. Or like, are you going to abandon your kids? It's like,
yes, it's just
and now
different.
this is, I'm not sure how much it's changed, but I think it's starting to change. So what I'm interested in is to see how this has been expressed in people's chart. Like as an astrologer, I'm more interested in seeing how these two principles, a principle that has to do with being safe, being taken care of, has been expressed. And sometimes it hasn't been expressed in a very healthy way. Sometimes it's completely absent. And then this other principle that is kind of, I think fatherhood is even more mysterious than motherhood. And I think when we have to explain what the sun is in a chart, I find it much harder to explain what the sun is than the moon is. And interesting, it also happened when I was doing the consultations, the sessions with the interviews. Some astrologers were saying, yeah, the sun is harder to define. And so I'm thinking of this other principle that we have that is telling us that there's an essence of us that wants to be expressed and that we can go into the world and express it. So I'm interested in seeing this more like these two kind of forces, and then asking the person, how has this expressed in your family? Who in your family, was expressing this or that? Because sometimes both parents had both roles in different moments or different circumstances.
Yes, yeah, and I think the ancestral line is an interesting one as well.
Yes.
You know, what are we carrying? We're from the father's line and the mother's line. So we're not just made of mum and dad, we're made of the ancestral line on two, going back, till when we first walked out of caves, really. If you
Yeah.
think about that, and the sort of this concept of, there we're the I feel like we're the ultimate expression. Sitting here, I'm the ultimate expression of my ancestral line at the moment. Then that
Yeah.
goes through to my kids, and you're the same. You know,
Yes.
I don't think we can. I think it has to come into this whole concept of what is sun and moon has to be more than just the archetype, the sun, and the archetype of the moon.
Yeah, and also because otherwise there's this um blaming, let's say, on the father and mother I had. And sometimes I'm thinking, no, this is your chart. this is not your mom, this is your chart. Because it's interesting when you look at siblings. So I'm drifting off a little bit. With the ancestry, what I usually think about is the fourth house, the eighth house, more than sun and moon. I'm interested in seeing, like, okay, where are we coming from, right? But the other thing why I find it a little bit tricky to treat the moon, I think, like, sometimes we use astrology to excuse ourselves and sometimes to blame our parents for things they did. And I'm like, well, this is your moon, this is my moon, and my moon is not the same moon that my sibling. I have 3 siblings. It's not the same moon. So of course our mom was not the same with all of us, but I like this idea of the emerging pattern. I wonder if this moon in Cancer that I am is actually something that emerged from the relationship between my mom and who I am, or whoever nourished me and who I am. All the figures that gave me protection and safety, and who I am. Because, okay, this is what happened. This is what happens is that I come to Greece. I'm 40 years old. I move to Greece. I don't know anyone. And people appear and they say, I'm going to take care of you. So, it's like, how does this happen? How is it that this happens? This is not my mom. This is not my grandmother or whoever nourished me. It's something that it's kind of something that I carry with me. And it's nothing I do. They just meet me and they're like, my closest friends here are the ones that I met in the first weeks. And they were like, yes, of course, I'm going to take care of you. And this is not the experience that everyone has.
Yes, but you do.
But it's my experience of this is my moon, so it's my experience. Yes. So I think it's sometimes tricky. We put it, we just say the moon is the mother, so we just describe what the mother is. And I'm thinking, no, the chart is like an energy field that is kind of expressing and being picked up by people that we meet, and it brings up situations.
It triggers stuff, I think, doesn't it? I mean,
yes.
So interesting, isn't it? The relationship, how people live out their chart, and how this is how I perceive it. That everyone that you meet is a kind of holds a mirror to you and your chart. And I've just been working with a client this morning, and she's just met somebody, a boyfriend, and he's holding a mirror up to her. She's Cancer, to be independent. He's an Aquarius. She's a Cancer. And they really like each other, but boy, are they struggling.
I imagine.
How do we negotiate that? But they've been drawn together to learn it. He's learning how to be with somebody, and she's learning how to let him be.
Yeah,
I just find that fascinating.
I think it's fascinating, and I think it's fascinating. Can you hear me well? I hear like a noise.
No, I can hear you.
I think it's fascinating how we change, because then I feel like we're not our chart all the time. We meet people that makes us connect with certain parts of our chart and make us realize. And I see it especially with the hard aspects, probably, how it's hard to bring them together. And we meet people, if we go too much onto one side of the aspect, then we meet people that kind of, in this case of this couple, I wonder, this Cancerian, what does she has that has to do more with air, with Aquarius, Uranus, I don't know. And for the other guy, the same. I wonder if he's so Aquarian, why is he suddenly attracted to this woman who's so dependable, right? So probably there's something about him trying to find his own sense of vulnerability and all these things.
And the universe, call it what you want, has brought them together to learn with each other for however long that learning is for.
Yeah.
I think the big thing for me is the change in relationships, because when my mum and dad were, divorce was almost unheard of. It was a disgrace. And when I was young, I was brought up to believe divorce was a disgrace. So you stuck together whatever. And now that isn't so. It is much more freeing and it's much more out there. So we're having many more experiences with our moon and our sun than we ever did in my parents' generation. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, it does, of course, yes. And I think especially with the sun, because also with the sun, we talk more about the masculine principle, or this is what the astrologers were coming up, the idea of the masculine principle, who you're going to become. And they talk about this masculine principle, which again, for me, I don't really know what it means, masculine principle, but this is how they referred it. And so I was asking the astrologers, how do they feel about this idea that in many these Greens books, it says that women used to project their sun onto their husbands, which I'm not saying Liz Green is wrong. I'm saying probably she was describing what she saw, that women were not allowed to be their son, so they had to put it out there somewhere.
Yeah.
But I was talking with one of the astrologers, and he said, but men also had to project their sun, because most men in the past could not choose what career to follow. Most people would do what their parents did, would
Yes.
continue like a family tradition. If there was a business, they would continue the business. If their parents were doctors, they had to be doctors. If they were lawyers, they had to be lawyers. It's more of a recent
Yes,
phenomenon
it is.
that we choose what we want to be. That we have vocation, like we go to vocational tests to see what are we supposed to become. So it was very interesting what he was saying, because he was saying it's not just that women, probably women had it much harder. I'm sure that women had much harder to express their sun, but everyone had to kind of, it was not so free to choose your path. Now we have more opportunities, I think, to do it.
Definitely. Well, we're changing partners more regularly. That's the other thing. So
Yeah,
if somebody's changing partners will be having different relationships with their expression of sun and their expression of moon. If you're
yeah,
changing partner, because you're going to
yes,
be drawing somebody in who will have their own different experience of their sun and moon going on, and
exactly,
will be
yes,
at a different age. You're
yes,
very different. When you come together in your 20s, gosh, that's different from when you're 40s and 50s and 60s.
completely, yes.
Yeah.
And then another thing I think builds up here. I mean, another question I have with this thing about the changing partners. Um, because on the one hand, yes, it's a good thing, of course, that people can get divorced, and some unhappy marriages, some marriages were really unhappy, and they can break up and create a new life. On the other hand, I feel like sometimes, we got into this society. I don't remember. That's a philosopher who talks about the disposable society. So now I feel like there is no sense of tolerance
Mm.
for difficult moments in the relationship. Because I also think that it's true that if you make a vow and you say, I'm going to stay with you in good and bad, there are some. There was this. I think it was the wife of Kinsey, Dr. Kinsey, who studied sexuality and all of these things. I'm not sure if it was her, but I think it was her who was once asked, "How do you build?" Because it seems that when they were together, they seemed a very happy couple. And she was asked, how did you build this couple?" And she said, "Well, we've been together for many years." It's like
Mm.
you cannot build this sense of trust and intimacy if in the first crisis you break up. And of course, it's very hard to tell. It's very hard to tell this crisis. Nothing can come out of this. We need to go apart. Or should we try to stand with each other, even though everything is so difficult? Because maybe we are going through a phase of transformation. And if we stay, we're going to stay, we're going to go into a deeper level of expressing. I don't want to say deeper, a more expanded level of expressing our sun and moon. I think sometimes with this freedom we jump, and yeah, we change experiences, but I don't know how much we expand, how much awareness we get.
Yes, it's an interesting one, that. And do you know something? In all my lifetime, I think I could probably count the amount of couples that really love each other and they're in it for the long run, maybe not even on two hands. I've
Mm.
known a lot of couples that stay together but it isn't love. It isn't that something.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
something else. And I think love is when you hit the sweet spot with somebody, you know, and your suns and your moons are talking to each other. Whoa. But
yeah.
that is rare.
Yeah, I think it is rare. I think love is rare. And actually, it's interesting also what you're saying, because maybe it means it's less about whether you stay together or separate, but more about how the experience changes you.
Yes.
You know, I imagine a lot of couples that stay together, yes, they stay together through critical situations, but they didn't change. So then they go to unhappy relationships. Probably the ones that are happy are the ones that in a critical situation they changed. And maybe, you know, we are in a critical situation, we break up, and that makes me change. So I end up anyway reaching happiness. Yeah, I don't know. Yes.
And you deepen your relationship with your own emotional self, your own
Yeah.
emotional moon, and you deepen your relationship with your sun and what that means to you. And everything has a higher vibration anyway. And I think that's what we've come here to learn, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes. We have so many things to learn. Yes. It's so hard. Who designed this world?
Aleko, is there anything else you'd like to say
Um,
about this?
uh, no, I think it was a nice discussion. Yes, I don't.
I really enjoyed it.
Maybe what I would like to say is that it's true that when I was asking the astrologers about the sun and the moon and how they understood masculine and feminine in relationship to the sun and the moon, uh, many of them immediately, most of them, they did not apply so much masculine and feminine to the sun and the moon, but they would ask me, why didn't you research Venus and Mars? So I'm wondering, you know, if the Venus and Mars archetype are more gender charged than the moon and the sun. But
Well, that's the PhD, isn't it?
yeah, that's the next research, yes. Yes.
Aleko, thanks so much. I just want to say that you're talking about this, aren't you, at the Sophia Centre conference on the 25th of January on 2025, so at the end of next January. And where is that going to be taking place?
It's in London.
It's in London. And where can people find out about that? And where can people find out about you?
So for the conference, if you go to Sophia Project, I think it's sophiaproject.com, you're going to see it. Or if you look just on Google Sophia Project Nick Campion, you're going to find it. And there is all the information. And if you want to find me, my webpage is Liminal Cosmos and everything. My Instagram is Liminal Cosmos. My email is meetme@liminalcosmos. Everything is Liminal Cosmos. Yes.
And I'll put all the links below.
Okay. Thank you. Yes.
Aleko, thank you so much. It's just been it's kind of made me think.
Sorry, can I add one more thing? Sorry, just
Of course.
that the dissertation is online. If somebody wants to read it, the university has published it. So if you look for Alejo Lopez, University of Wales, or I can give you the link to put it in the description. If somebody wants to read it, you can read it from there. Yes.
Brilliant. Okie dokie. Well, until the next time.
So thank you so much for inviting me. It's like complete honor. Thank you so much.
See you next time. Bye for now.